My parents drove 6 hours to watch me graduate from a university I hadn't attended in almost 2 years. My mother brought flowers. My father wore the same suit he had worn to my high school graduation. They had already booked a restaurant and invited relatives to watch the ceremony online. There was only one problem. My name wasn't in the graduation program. I had been expelled after gambling away my tuition money, and every class, exam, and internship I had told them about since then was a lie. My name is Ethan. I'm 24 years old, and I work nights at a distribution warehouse in Indiana. 3 years ago, I was studying computer science at a state university. I was the first person in my immediate family to go to college. My father, Mark, has worked as a diesel mechanic for most of his life. My mother, Lisa, is a receptionist at a medical clinic. Neither of them earned much, but they were careful with money. We lived in the same small house from the time I was 6. My father repaired everything himself. Our cars were always at least 10 years old. We didn't take expensive vacations. When I got accepted into university, my mother cried at the kitchen table. My father didn't cry. He just read the acceptance letter twice, nodded, and said, "You're going to have choices we never had." That sentence stayed with me. My parents had started saving for my education when I was a child. It wasn't enough to cover everything, so I also had financial aid and a small student loan. They agreed to help with the remaining tuition and part of my rent. I chose computer science because I had always been good with computers, and because everyone said the degree would lead to a stable career. I imagined graduating at 22, getting a job in software, and helping my parents pay off their house. I wasn't a perfect student, but during my first semester I did well. I attended lectures, finished my assignments, and made a few friends. One of them was a guy named Ryan. Ryan lived on the same floor in my residence hall. He was confident, funny, and always seemed to have money. He ordered food almost every night, went out every weekend, and never complained about being broke. One evening, I asked him how he afforded it. He showed me a sports betting app. I had watched basketball and football my whole life, but I had never placed a bet. Ryan talked about it as if it were a second job. He showed me statistics, injury reports, and betting lines. He said most people lost because they bet emotionally. "We don't do that," he told me. "We use information." I believed him because he sounded like he believed himself. At that point, I had no idea gambling would cost me my education. I thought it might help pay for it. My first bet was $20 on a college basketball game. I lost. The next night, I won $46. It wasn't a lot, but it felt different from earning money at work. I didn't have to stand behind a counter or carry boxes. I watched a game, made a prediction, and got paid. A few weeks later, Ryan helped me build a parlay across 5 basketball games. I put $100 on it. All 5 teams won. My account balance jumped to just over $2,700. That win changed the way I saw gambling. I used some of the money to buy a new laptop. When my parents noticed it during a video call, I told them the university had given me a technology grant. My mother smiled and said, "See, all that hard work is already paying off." I felt guilty for lying, but the guilt was mixed with pride. I had made money on my own. At least, that was how I thought about it. I began betting almost every day. At first, I stayed with college basketball and football. Then I started betting on professional sports. After that came tennis, baseball, hockey, and games in other countries. I would sit in lectures with my laptop open, pretending to take notes while watching live odds move across the screen. My grades started slipping. I missed assignments because I stayed awake until 3 in the morning watching games. I skipped morning lectures after losing money because I couldn't stand being around people. Every loss made me feel like I had to win immediately. I wasn't chasing excitement anymore. I was chasing relief. By the end of my first year, the $2,700 was gone. So was most of the money I had earned from my summer job. I told myself I would stop during my second year. Instead, I started betting more. My parents transferred money to me in August to cover the part of my tuition that financial aid didn't cover. The payment deadline was still several weeks away, so the money sat in my account. It was more than $8,000. I had never had that much money available to me before. At the time, I was down around $3,500 from gambling. I had also borrowed money from Ryan and used a credit card. I decided to take $1,000 from the tuition money. Not spend it, use it. I believed I could turn it into enough to pay my debts, replace the money, and still cover tuition. I lost it in one weekend. Then I used another $1,000 to win back the first. That disappeared too. By the time the university payment deadline arrived, I had less than half the tuition money left. I panicked. I stopped going to class and spent 3 days betting almost constantly. I remember sitting alone in my room with my curtains closed, telling myself that one good win could make everything normal again. Instead, I lost the rest. The university sent me emails warning that my registration would be canceled if I didn't pay. I ignored them. Then my student account was placed on hold. I could no longer access some course materials. My meal plan stopped working. My professors began asking why I wasn't attending. I told my parents there had been a problem with my financial aid, but that the university was fixing it. My father offered to call. I said students had to handle these things themselves because of privacy rules. That was true enough to sound convincing. 2 weeks later, I was removed from my classes. I wasn't officially expelled for gambling. I was academically and financially dismissed after failing to pay and missing most of the semester. I packed my clothes and left the residence hall. I had every intention of going home and telling my parents. But during the drive, my mother called. She sounded happy. She told me my father had been showing my university photo to customers at the repair shop. Then she asked whether I was eating properly. I said yes. She asked how classes were going. I said they were difficult, but good. That lie decided the next 2 years of my life. Instead of going home, I rented a room in an old house about 15 minutes from campus. 4 other people lived there. None of them were students. The rent was cheap, and the landlord didn't ask many questions. I found a job delivering food in the evenings and working part-time at a grocery store. I told my parents I had moved out of student housing because an apartment was cheaper. They were proud of me for being responsible. For the first few weeks, I tried to create a plan. I would work, save money, pay what I owed, and return to university the following semester. It sounded possible when I wrote it down, but I was ashamed, lonely, and terrified that my parents would discover the truth, so I kept gambling. I told myself that work alone would take too long. If I could win $10,000 or $15,000, I could repay the university and return before anyone noticed. I gambled my paychecks. I opened credit cards. I took out small online loans. I borrowed money from coworkers and said my financial aid was delayed. Every morning, I left my rented room with a backpack. Sometimes I went to the university library. Anyone could enter the main floors, and no one questioned me. I would sit among real students and pretend to work. I watched people complain about exams I would have given anything to take. I listened to them talk about internships, group projects, and job applications. I was surrounded by the life I had lost, but instead of admitting it, I used the university Wi-Fi to gamble. My parents called every Sunday. I created an entire fake academic life for them. I invented professors. I complained about assignments that didn't exist. I told them I had received a B on an exam. I described a group project with students whose names I had overheard in the library. When my mother asked to see my grades, I edited a screenshot of the student portal. It wasn't difficult. I changed course names, credit hours, and grades. She looked at the image for less than a minute and told me how proud she was. My lies became more detailed because details made them sound real. I told my father about a programming assignment involving a hospital scheduling system. I told my mother I had joined a campus technology club. I said I had applied for internships. When they visited, I met them near the student center. I wore a university sweatshirt and carried my old student ID. I showed them buildings and talked about classes I wasn't taking. My father bought lunch and asked whether I needed more money for books. I said no. That was one of the few times I told the truth. I didn't need money for books. I needed money for bets. At the end of what should have been my 3rd year, my mother asked why I wasn't coming home for the summer. I told her I had found an internship with a small software company. In reality, I had taken a full-time job at a warehouse. I created a fake company email address and sent myself an internship confirmation so I could forward it to my parents. Every weekday, I wore a plain polo shirt and drove to the warehouse. At night, I told my parents about meetings, coding tasks, and a supervisor named Aaron. There was no Aaron. I had heard the name on a podcast. The longer the lie continued, the more impossible confession felt. If I had told them after losing the tuition money, I would have been a scared student who made a terrible mistake. After 6 months, I was also a liar. After a year, I had forged documents. After 2 years, I had accepted thousands of dollars from my parents for rent, tuition fees, and textbooks I wasn't buying. They sent the money directly to me because I had told them I could receive a discount by paying through a special student account. Most of it went toward debts and gambling. I didn't lose every dollar immediately. Sometimes I used their money to pay rent or make minimum payments. That helped me pretend I wasn't stealing all of it. Then I would gamble what remained. During those 2 years, I had several large wins. Once, I won more than $19,000 in a week. It was enough to pay most of the amount I owed the university. I logged into my old student account and looked at the balance. For almost an hour, I considered paying it. Then I started calculating what else I needed. Back rent, credit cards, loans, money I had taken from my parents. I convinced myself that $19,000 wasn't enough to fix everything. If I could turn it into $30,000, I could solve the entire problem. 3 days later, it was gone. That was the closest I ever came to returning. Near the end of the second year, my parents began talking about graduation. My mother asked how many tickets each student received. I told her the university hadn't announced it yet. She started planning anyway. She invited my aunt and grandparents to watch the ceremony online. She reserved a table at an Italian restaurant near campus. My father told everyone at work that his son was graduating with a computer science degree. I tried to create a way out. I told my parents I might need an extra semester because one required class was full. My mother said that was fine. My father said, "We've come this far. Do it properly." Then he transferred another $6,000. I lost most of it within 2 weeks. A month later, I received a message from my mother. She had bought me a graduation gift. She wouldn't say what it was. I sat in my car outside the warehouse and cried. Then I opened a betting app. By that point, gambling wasn't even connected to a realistic plan. I knew there was no amount of money that could create 2 years of academic records. But betting delayed the moment when I had to think about that. If a game was happening, I could focus on the game. If money was moving, I could pretend my life was still moving too. 3 weeks before graduation, my father called. He said his knee had become bad enough that his doctor recommended surgery. I knew he had been in pain for years. "When are you getting it done?" I asked. He said he was postponing it until later in the year. He wanted to make sure my final tuition payment and graduation expenses were covered first. I told him not to do that. He laughed and said, "I've waited this long. A few more months won't kill me." I almost confessed. I opened my mouth and said, "Dad." Then he told me he was proud of me. I said nothing. On graduation morning, my parents arrived at 7. The ceremony was scheduled for 10. I had told them to meet me outside the student center because graduates had to arrive early. My mother stepped out of the car holding a bouquet and a garment bag. My father was wearing a dark suit that was slightly too tight around his shoulders. He walked with a noticeable limp. My mother hugged me and said, "We did it. Not you did it. We did it." I wanted to tell them right there. Instead, I said I needed to pick up my graduation gown from a friend. I had bought a used cap and gown online, but I had left them in my room. I couldn't bring myself to put them on. I told my parents to wait while I went to get them. I drove away and parked several blocks from campus. For 40 minutes, I sat in my car. My phone kept ringing. My mother sent messages asking where I was. My father said they couldn't find the correct entrance for my department. I considered turning off my phone and driving away. I considered telling them I had been in an accident. I considered saying the ceremony had been canceled because of a security threat. Even then, my mind was searching for one more lie. Eventually, I drove back. I found them near an information tent. My mother looked worried. My father was holding the printed graduation program. He had searched it several times. "Your name isn't in here," he said. I told him there had been an administrative mistake. He asked a volunteer where computer science graduates were supposed to meet. The volunteer directed us toward another building. My father started walking. I followed him. Every step made his limp look worse. Inside the building, families were taking photographs. Graduates in caps and gowns were hugging their parents. My father approached a staff member and explained that my name was missing from the program. The woman asked for my student identification. I said I didn't have it. She asked for my university email address. I gave it to her. She typed something into a computer, then looked at me. Because of privacy rules, she couldn't give my parents any details. She asked whether she could speak with me alone. My father looked at my face. He understood before she said anything. He asked, "Are you graduating today?" I couldn't answer. My mother said my name. I looked at the flowers in her hands. Then I said no. My father asked whether I had failed a class. I said no. He asked why I wasn't graduating. I told them I hadn't been enrolled for almost 2 years. My mother stared at me as though she hadn't understood the words. "What do you mean, not enrolled?" I said I had lost the tuition money gambling. I told them the university had removed me from my classes. I told them I had never completed the internship. I told them the grades were fake. My mother slowly sat down on a bench. My father remained standing. He asked, "Where have you been going every morning?" "Mostly work," I said. "And when we visited?" "The library." He looked around at the students walking past us. "So you came here every day?" "Sometimes." "But you weren't a student?" I shook my head. My mother began crying. Not loudly. She covered her mouth with one hand and looked down at the bouquet. My father asked how much money I had taken from them. I said I didn't know. He asked again. I estimated around $26,000 after I had left university. That didn't include the original tuition money. My father sat beside my mother. For a while, none of us spoke. Then he said something I hadn't expected. That money wasn't savings. I looked at him. He had borrowed against his retirement account. He had taken a loan to cover what he believed were my last 3 semesters. My mother had increased her working hours and used a small inheritance from her aunt. My father had postponed his surgery because the loan payments had reduced their monthly income. I had spent 2 years telling myself I was gambling away my own future. I wasn't. I was gambling away theirs too. My mother asked whether any part of my story had been true. I told her I really had been working. It sounded pathetic as soon as I said it. My father took the car keys from me. The car was registered in his name because he had helped me buy it. He told me to collect my belongings from the rented room and find my own way home. My mother placed the flowers on the bench. They left without going to the restaurant. I sat there while families walked past me toward the ceremony. An hour later, I heard cheering from the stadium. I remember thinking that somewhere nearby, thousands of people were finishing the exact future I had pretended to have. I moved back to my hometown a week later. My parents allowed me to stay in their basement, but only under conditions. I had to show them every bank account. I had to give my father control of my paychecks. I had to attend gambling recovery meetings. I had to repay the money. And I was not allowed to talk about returning to university until I had gone 1 full year without gambling. My father told me, "I don't want another plan. I want proof." For the first few months, we barely spoke. My mother was polite, which somehow felt worse than anger. She stopped asking about my day. My father had the knee surgery 6 months later. He used medical leave from work and borrowed more money to cover the time he couldn't earn. I drove him to his appointments. He never mentioned that he had delayed the surgery because of me. He didn't need to. I found work at the warehouse where I still work now. I started on the night shift loading trucks. Almost every paycheck went toward debt and repayment. I hated the job at first. I kept thinking I should have been working in software, sitting in an office and earning twice as much. Then I realized I was still comparing my real life to a future I had never earned. Recovery wasn't dramatic. There was no single day when I stopped wanting to gamble. For months, every financial problem made me think about betting. If I owed $500, my brain immediately tried to find a way to win $500 instead of working enough hours to earn it. I blocked gambling websites, closed my accounts, and gave up access to my cards. I attended meetings twice a week. At my first meeting, I told the group I had lost my tuition. A man in his 50s said, "You didn't lose it, you gambled it." I was angry when he said that. Later, I understood. Calling it a loss made it sound like something that happened to me. It was something I had done. I have not gambled in 18 months. I have repaid a little over $14,000 to my parents. There is still a long way to go. My relationship with my mother has improved. My father is harder. He speaks to me. We sometimes repair things in the garage together, but he no longer believes promises. A few months ago, I told him I was thinking about taking one evening class at a community college. He didn't tell me it was a good idea. He said, "Pay for it yourself. Finish it. Then tell me." So that is what I did. I enrolled in one introductory programming course and paid for it from my own account after covering my debt payment. I didn't announce it to relatives. I didn't post a photograph. I didn't create a plan for the next 4 years. I just went to class. Last week, I received my final grade, an A-. I printed the result and placed it on the kitchen table. My father looked at it for a few seconds. Then he nodded and said, "Good. What's next?" It wasn't the reaction I once imagined getting when I graduated, but it was real. I still don't know whether I will finish a degree. It will take years if I continue studying part-time. By the time I graduate, if I graduate, most of the people I started university with will already have careers. I used to think that meant my future was gone. Now I think the future is just smaller and slower than the one my parents originally bought for me. I can live with that. The hardest part isn't knowing I lost 2 years of education. It's knowing my parents spent those same 2 years believing their sacrifices were building my life, while I was using them to maintain a lie. I gambled away the future they imagined for me. Now I'm trying to build another one without asking them to pay for it.